All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to talk about something that's absolutely critical in technology. How do you turn the total chaos of a system failure into a calm, predictable, and, well, orderly process? We're going to explore how the best teams handle disaster and actually build systems that learn from it.
Now, just so we're all on the same page, what we're talking about today is focused squarely on the essential concepts from the DevOps and management domain, for the accreditation exam. This is the foundational stuff you really, really need to know.
Okay, so picture this. It's 3 in the morning. You're woken up by that sound. You know the one, that piercing alarm from your laptop. You log in and your stomach just drops. The main application is completely down. Customers are all over social media. The dashboards, they're all blinking red. It's a total disaster. You start digging into the error logs, and the numbers are just terrifying. 95% of all requests from users are failing. I mean, this isn't some tiny bug, right? This is a full-blown catastrophic failure. The pressure is on, and every single second of downtime is costing you money and, more importantly, trust.
And you know exactly what caused it. It was that shiny new feature your team just pushed out an hour ago. So here's the question for you. With the whole system on fire and alarms going off everywhere, what's your very first move? What do you do right now?
The answer? It's got to be simple and it's got to be fast. You roll it back, you don't start investigating, you don't start trying to figure out why, you just stop the bleeding. Your number one job is to get the service back up for your users, and the fastest way to do that is to undo the change you just made. Okay, so you've put out the immediate fire. Now it's time to call in the first responders. And just like in an accident scene, everyone needs a clear job to do. First up, you've got the incident commander, or IC. Think of them as the captain of the ship. Then there's the operations lead, the engineer who's hands-on, actually fixing the problem. And finally, the communications lead, who's the messenger to everyone outside the core team. Let's zoom in on that incident commander role for a second, because it's super important. Their job is absolutely not to be in the weeds typing commands into a terminal. Their whole purpose is to manage the big picture, to coordinate the team, and to make the final tough decisions. They're the general on the hill, directing the troops, not the soldier on the front line. So, the team's in place, roles are assigned. What is the very next thing you do? You have to set up a single channel for communication. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's a Slack channel, a Zoom call, whatever. What matters is that there's one place, and only one place, where everyone is talking about the incident. It cuts out all the noise and confusion. All right, let's jump ahead. The rollback worked, the system is stable, and you can finally take a breath. Whew! But listen, the emergency might be over, but the most important work, it's just getting started. This is the moment where you get to learn. So what happens now? The team hits this fork in the road, right? There are two ways this can go. Down one path, you have the blame culture. The first question is always, who did this? And you know where that leads? People start hiding their mistakes, nobody learns anything, and the company just stagnates. But the other path, the blameless culture, asks a different question. What happened? This one encourages people to share what they know, which lets everyone innovate and the whole system gets better. And this leads us to probably the most powerful tool you have for learning from failure, the blameless postmortem. The best way to think about this is to look at the airline industry. When a plane goes down, the goal isn't to find a pilot to punish. No way. They dig in to understand every single contributing cause so they can share that information and make every single flight in the future safer for all of us. That's the mindset here. So what actually goes into one of these reports? Well, it's all about the facts. We write down the root causes, exactly what we did to fix it, and what we learned. We also create a list of action items, prioritized, to make sure this doesn't happen again. And look closely at what we've crossed out here. A list of people responsible. You never, ever do that. The goal is to fix systems, not to point fingers at people. Okay, let's pull back for a second and look at the bigger picture. See, incidents like this often happen because there's this natural tug-of-war inside almost every tech company. On one side, you have developers who need to ship new features and move fast. On the other side, you have operators who need to keep the system stable and, well, not break things. These two goals are always going to be in tension. So how do you manage that tension? How do you find a balance? You do it with a formal agreement. It's called a service level objective, or SLO for short. It's a specific, measurable target for how reliable your service needs to be. For example, agreeing to 99.9% uptime. It's a number, it's black and white, it's a goal everyone can see and work towards together. And here's where it gets really clever.
If you look at this chart, our SLO is that big green slice, 99.9% uptime. But what about that tiny little slice, that 0.1%? Well, that is your error budget. It's basically permission to fail a little bit. It's an agreement that 100% perfection just isn't a realistic goal.
The easiest way to think about this is like a monthly budget or an allowance. You get a certain amount of downtime you can spend on things like launching a risky new feature. But, and this is the key, if you run out of money, if that budget hits zero, you have to stop spending. All new feature releases are frozen until you've made the system more reliable and earned some of that budget back. So this whole budget thing is great for managing risk, but it's still, reacting to problems after they happen. So that leads to the obvious next question. How can we get ahead of this? How do we stop breaking things in the first place? And that's where the idea of having different environments comes in. It's absolutely critical. Let's use a restaurant analogy. First, you have your development environment. Think of this like a chef's test kitchen. It's a lab where you can experiment and make a mess. Then you have the test environment. That's the prep kitchen, where the whole team practices making the dish perfectly. And finally, production. That's the live restaurant where you're serving paying customers. You'd never test a brand new recipe on a paying customer, right? Same thing with your...
Okay, but how do you make sure your test kitchen and your real restaurant are set up the same way every time? That's where tools like Terraform come in, using an approach called infrastructure as code. The best analogy I've heard is that it's like a save file for your entire system, just like in a video game. If something goes terribly wrong, you don't panic, you just load your last good save. That's what this lets you do.
So let's just recap everything we've talked about. What are the key pillars that bring order from chaos? You need a clear plan for when things break. You need a culture that learns from failure instead of punishing it. You need a budget that allows for taking calculated risks. You need safe places to practice before you go live. And you need your infrastructure to be as controlled and repeatable as your code. And if you remember only one thing from this entire discussion, let it be this. At the essential level, DevOps isn't really about the tools. It's not about which program you use. It's a culture. It's all about communication and how people work together to solve that constant tension between moving fast and staying stable. And this quote right here really sums up the whole mindset. The point isn't to point fingers. It's about building systems and teams that are resilient, that learn from failure and actually get stronger because of it, making everything safer and more reliable for everyone who depends on you. So I'll just leave you with one final question to think about. The next time something breaks where you work, just watch, listen to the conversation. Does everyone immediately start asking who did it? Or do they start asking what part of the system allowed it to happen? The answer to that question tells you everything you need to know about the culture of your team.